call this meeting to order. It's 6:30. We'll start with a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. And approval of the agenda. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, agenda is passed. Comments on agenda items. We have Mr. LePere, who would like to address us regarding the wetlands. Yeah. We'll do it right now. Oh, you want to do it during the discussion of the public hearing? Okay.
I just wanted to make sure my name was there.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments regarding agenda items this evening?
Craig, the journal said there was the public hearing on the Feller wetlands. Also said something about Sweetwater Creek.
We have a on the agenda tonight is an amendment for Sweetwater Creek.
Okay, it made it sound like it was
That's
That's what it says.
on the agenda.
Yeah, it's a notification that RCO has accepted the amendment, and
So transfer.
it's not our property anymore.
That's what that.
okay.
So we'll,
The journal just made it sound like there was a public hearing about both of those items.
oh, sorry,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, that's right.
That was just to ensure we're not on that
Okay.
anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Moving on, board member comments. Yeah, you have anything?
No, I think I'm good. We got one thing to go.
Okay, good.
My most exciting thing was preparing for the Day on the Hill. And since it never came, I was really disappointed.
Yeah, snow will do that.
But I was prepared to act.
I'm sure you were.
I'm sure you're ready.
Well, I was starting out really well. I've had a chance now twice, but since the last board meeting, I had a chance to see the girls and the boys basketball teams, their final games of the year, which is always fun for me to do when I get to do it, which isn't very often. But I got to do that. And unfortunately, they lost, both teams, but that's okay. They played well. And then I thought things were gonna, have a chance to do other things. We had a bunch of Builders Club meetings and stuff, and then that snow hit. And I'm still recovering.
That's good.
I didn't charge my shaver up before the power went out, and I was out for a long time.
It looks good on you.
Thank you.
We hosted a basketball game here on Saturday, and I got a lot of compliments on it. I'm rushing here. Port Angeles and Olympic, and there was a board member from Port Angeles who was there, thanked us for rushing it together the way we did last night. It's also a good point to note, Director Bode is excused for tonight. And I'm kind of happy to report, I was accepted into Leadership Wadsden. So it's a year-long program, so it also got canceled with our Day on the Hill, our first meeting, so they had to reschedule it.
We
so.
both were prepared.
We were prepared,
Yeah.
but no action, so.
I have a quick question. I don't know, was there a recording other than all the parents, of the singing of all the district, here in the auditorium? The show that was on, I didn't know if we recorded it as a district or if just parents. Well, if anybody gets to see that, Kelly, her daughter, got up and sang, This Is Me. She started it, and that girl's voice, she did a really good job. All the kids that came together from small all the way up to high school, that was a really amazing thing. That's what I was kind of saying.
Cool. Okay. Spencer, you have anything?
Yeah, so at the high school, we're all busy getting caught up from the week-long winter break. We're also hosting a coin drive benefiting the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. That's going on until next week. And then we also have a blood drive coming up next week, and we're getting ready for spring sports. They'll start next week too.
Awesome.
What time
Oh,
is the
but
blood
spring?
drive? Spring?
What?
What time and what day is the blood drive?
I'm not, I believe it's next Friday, all day.
Have you told Mother Nature about spring yet?
Is the blood drive something that the parents have to sign off on, or they do and then? they
Any
have a
kid
s-
under the age of 18 has to get it approved from their parents.
All right, thank you. We will go into a public hearing on the Feller Wetlands transfer, and just so everyone knows, there's been no change since January's meeting. We're at the same spot we were then, so there's gonna be no action tonight, and chances are there's gonna be no action on an official transfer next month either, until we haven't even had a chance to see what contract language looks like or what has been agreed to or not agreed to. So with that said, we'll still allow a little bit, anyone who would like to speak up on the possibility of transferring it. This is on here, is we're looking at transferring it to the State Department of Fish and Wildlife. We had a big kind of a public forum, is that December? This- I'm sorry, I'm using all sorts of, no, it's January, it's before January meeting.
That's right.
So I thought it was really good input and a good discussion, and most of it was directed towards fish and wildlife, which suited me just fine. So, if anyone has you'd like to make a comment, so please, this is a great time to do it.
Just repeat what I said last time.
Okay.
I've been volunteering down here for, 4 or 5 years. Took over when Floyd retired from being a volunteer. I see the wetlands as Sam and Mary's Cathedral that they gave us, and since there's no money left in the account, and since the school district, because of wax and whatever that other thing is we have to deal with.
RCW.
RCW, yes, I can never remember that one. Should have remembered that from when I was on the.
That was the most important one.
Well, we can't spend money on the wetlands because of that, whereas Fish and Wildlife, if they can get money from the legislature, can spend money on the wetlands. And I want to see them stay as they are, if not improve them if we can, but I mean, at least fix the things that need to be fixed. And my two things is keeping, it's the closest thing to God is being out here, as long as I'm not running power equipment, because then I can't hear the birds and stuff. But I also want to keep it handicap accessible. I had a cousin who, we were both the same age, died of muscular dystrophy at 21, so it's really near and dear to me to keep the trails as accessible as we possibly can. The snow did make it really tough. I talked with one group Sunday after I got the fire line opened up, and they were gonna take a wheeled vehicle, just pull cart. And I said, you're gonna die before you get that go down. And they didn't go down. I mean, it was ankle deep slush at that point. So anyway, I'm all for it staying the way it is. If Fish and Wildlife can do the job better than we can, because we can't spend money. I'm speaking as a school district. Can't spend money on it, they can. I'm all for it.
All right, thank you so much.
And the other thing was, they'll let me continue volunteering.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, appreciate that. Any other comments regarding that? Going once? Twice? All right, we'll close that and move on to the consent agenda. And I would accept a motion to accept or not accept the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed?
We missed having discussion.
We don't need to have discussion on the consent agenda.
For any motion, you have to have discussion.
I don't think we do.
Yeah. The proper procedure is, you have a motion, then you have to open it up for discussion, and then you vote afterwards.
I messed that up, I didn't need a second. I apologize.
You don't need a
Can
second.
we just erase that? I didn't do it. I didn't do it, right? It makes it void. Okay. Some sort of executive privilege?
Move it again.
Yeah, move to erase that. John?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to erase it.
Okay. Discussion.
I think it's a fine idea to discuss this. I'm for it.
To disapprove and then all in favor, start.
Yeah, I'm, never mind.
Okay.
I move that we cancel that last movement and,
Alright.
Yeah.
and now,
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Now, I would accept a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the consent agenda as it is presented to us.
No second, but discussion.
Correct.
There we go.
Great idea.
Yes.
I have a couple of minor questions, because I was not able to really get into it and reading this much. I would really appreciate it if maybe Deanna, you could just give us just a real small synopsis on the thing I was, the big one was the affirmative action plan.
Okay.
I did get to look at it, and it is huge.
It is huge, and it's a requirement that we do it every 5 years, as you can see. And this is the new updated version. I think the biggest change from previously is there were subgroups in the previous plan that we had to report on that are not part of the report anymore, so it actually condensed the plan a little bit. And what we need to report on and then follow up on appropriately is how are we going to ensure that we're not discriminating in employment or in the activities that we offer for our constituents, our students in the district. And we were actually able to, as we look at the subgroups of people, populations, we have made some improvements in having hired some staff, at least, who are not Caucasian American, and so that we have a little bit more of diversity in our staff. One of the things that I think Denise will tell me I got this wrong, but previously we had to report on age groups as well, and that part is not part of the report this time. So that's a summary.
Okay, well,
So
that's-
it's just a plan for how we will make sure that we have staff who represent the population that we serve, and how we make sure that we treat all people regardless of what subgroup they might belong to in an equitable way.
Right, I did notice so much of the document, well, of the verbiage seemed to be saying, referring to the plan, and referring to the plan, and referring to the plan. So much of it, almost more than half of it was referring to the plan, and so it was, well, where is the plan? And that was just, gosh, that's an awful lot of, if you wanna call it gobbledygook, to get in the way of being able to understand what's going on there.
It is an awful lot of
Yeah.
gobbledygook, and it's the plan, the report is a required format that we have to do. And so, the actual discussion we can have very briefly, and then Denise works for days and days and days to make sure that we have all the correct sentences in that report, and then we agree that it's ready to go and present to you. And
Right, yeah, it just makes it so much more difficult to understand what's going on with it. The other thing I would like, if you could, where was it, the policy on the district notification of juvenile offenders. What is really different there?
Really, the new language in that policy calls out expectation that we will hold for those folks who would notify us about how they will notify us, and that the notification will happen. So it's really an interesting recommended policy, because we're writing policy about what juvenile justice and
What another entity will do.
in partnership with us. And that's in response to RCW, so they're supposed to be writing the same policy or policy that mirrors this.
Okay.
But basically, what it talks about is when a juvenile offender is released, we have to be notified, and we have to respond appropriately into how we provide services for that student, and in some cases, ensure that everybody else is safe in relationship to that student, based on whatever their particular offense was. So, there are different requirements for a student who was a sex offender than for a student who was an offender of another kind of violence, or something that was incarcerated.
I didn't have any other questions or comments.
I'm glad we tried to, I just messed that up, because I did have a question. Back to the affirmative action, deal, under, I guess, Article 3, subsection B, just the last sentence on that one, says the affirmative action officer shall ensure that recruitment efforts are reaching protected groups as well as unprotected groups in all categories where underutilization exists. How do we ensure that the recruitment efforts are reaching those groups?
So when we recruit, we have to look for ways to find underrepresented groups, representatives to apply for our jobs.
Okay.
So we can do that in a variety of ways. When we're looking, for example, for teachers and we're talking to universities, in addition, or to just talking to the teaching department, we can find out, are there, some universities have Black student unions or different other organizations that would also have ways for students to be identified that might be interested in positions. In Seattle, in the Seattle area, mainly in Bellevue, there is a job fair for people who are Latino, Latina that happens regularly throughout the year, so we can participate in those kinds of opportunities to find underrepresented.
So there's networks to, okay. Hopefully it wasn't just like throwing job announcements out there and hoping that,
Yeah.
okay. Any other discussion for the consent agenda?
I just want to say that I am really happy to see that almost every single time that we get an agenda, we see something new as far as a club or something that they get to meet. They like a anime group that they're starting. Art, of course, is my thing. So, but every time I see something new that a student probably said, "Hey, why isn't this here?" and then they've started it. I love that. So, that's it.
All right. John, anything? All right, well, I'll call for the question then. All those in favor of approving the consent items, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. It's approved. Board Development Linkage, Superintendent's update.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with the budget status report and dashboard and financials.
Okay, so we're looking at January 2019. We'll start with our other funds. Capital projects, we ended January with 2.6 million. We're slowly gonna start, that fund's slowly gonna start dwindling down, especially as we get to the point where we start talking the new stands. Debt service, we're at just under $2 million there since we made those debt payments in December. ASB, they went up a tad bit in January, up to $394,000. And the transportation vehicle fund, due to some surplus material, is up to $50,739. Enough for a replacement engine. So,
Question. Looking at that ASB, those figures, that 394, I think that's the highest I've ever seen it.
yeah, well, and a lot of that's going to be based upon the ASB's current activity as far as like actual dollars out the door expenditures. Like they had a dance that was planned for, which would have had expenses with that one. That ended up getting canceled. Not enough students had signed up to attend. So there just hasn't been a lot of those additional activities where we would see expenditures. But there still have been the fundraisers and such bringing the dollars through the door.
Right,
So-
because generally that figure, well, it changes slightly, stays in that vicinity all the time.
Correct. And it really
It's almost
does.
like it's got a floating amount of money that,
Yeah.
which actually kind of like that, but,
Yeah, it's actually fairly rare for us to see it go up above 400,000.
right.
So we'll see where it ends at the end of this month. I'm thinking that as we hit spring though, we're gonna start seeing quite a bit more expenditures come from that fund. So,
Okay, thanks.
okay, so the our enrollment went down just over 1 FTE in the month of February, because this is February's count, that's our most recent one. But we're still trending above average, overall from where we budgeted. January was our redirection month, and so that's when they look at our actual enrollment versus our budgeted, and they let us know what we're gonna be receiving in addition to what our original funding was going to be. I am happy to say that we did receive a decent chunk of money towards SPED, which will be extremely helpful because we have seen a much higher special education count this year over what we had originally budgeted. So those dollars are definitely going to be put to good use.
What was that now?
$350,000, which is actually quite significant just for special education. And then we saw about a $200,000 increase in our general apportionment budget, which is, again, very nice to see. So again, that is due to the increased enrollment. Now, when we knew that we were going to be seeing that increase in enrollment come September, we did have to hire additional teachers to be able to fund that. So it's not that those technically are extra dollars on the books. Technically, we spent those when we hired the teachers, but we weren't getting funded for it at that time, but we knew we would eventually. So yeah, so they did the redirection, and it upped our total apportionment by just over $500,000 currently. Some of our smaller categorical programs also increased, but nothing noteworthy. So those were our two biggest areas. So now for our Forecast 5 model. For revenues, we're still trending right above where we should be for this time of the year. Because we did receive the redirection, we did see a tad bit of a bump in revenues, especially in the special education and in our general apportionment areas. Some of the more interesting pieces that I wanted to point out is actually on the expenditure side. So on the next slide, we are trending at about 11.46 as far as fund balance, but that fund balance is where we would be anticipated to be at the end of the year, not just for the month of January.
Okay.
Month of January, we're technically just a tad bit under 8%, but it's stating that if we're trending at this exact rate for the rest of the year, we would be at 11%.
And that's including the redirection?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that includes the redirection, and that's why we saw the bump. Last month, we saw that it was actually much lower than 11%. I think last month it was just under 8% because of the transfer from general fund to debt service fund. But when we got that redirection, it bumped that up significantly. So in the top 10 expenditures chart right there, you're gonna see a section that says unassigned. It's the second from the bottom. That's our transfer.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the transfer to pay our non-voted debt. And then you can see our special education and our basic education obviously are our top two places where we're spending money. If you go over to the expenditures by object, where the cursor is right there, one of the things that I wanted to point out is regarding that very first set of bar graphs regarding the certificated salaries. So that maroon color is where we were last year at this time. That purple is where we are now. At this time of the year, we spent about $1.2 million more in certificated salaries than we had at this time last year. So that's where we're seeing those negotiated salary increases, and that's sort of where we're trending at that point. So I just wanted to point that out, and then that's why you see sort of the larger increase on the benefit side, which is your third set of bar graphs over. And then your classified salaries, they did receive an increase this year, so that's where that's coming into play. So our month-end balances on the next sheet. So right there in January is where we're ending at that 2.239. Now you will notice a variance if you look at the actual 2018-19 budget status report that I give you guys and our Forecast 5 reports. If you look at the two ending fund balance numbers, you're gonna notice that they're off. So because of our wonderful snowstorm in February, Our payroll individuals worked really, really hard and got transportation payroll done a week early just in case. Thankfully, they did that because we were then out of school for a week. So because they got transportation payroll done early, transportation payroll accrues back to the prior month. So it hit our books, it hit our system. So it threw the two reports off, but it's a reconciling item, so it's the transportation payroll amount, that's the difference between the two. So just in case you guys had noticed that, I just wanted to point that out. So the next page. So this is a summary of where we're at currently. There's nothing super surprising, alarming, or sort of out of the ordinary as far as our trends go. The one area where you're seeing in the revenue side the 65% year-to-date budget increase, it's right there in the center. That 80,000 is sort of where we estimate our special federal grants are going to land as far as total revenue dollars collected. We have collected more to date in that area than we have in previous years, but it's because we've gone out for more federal grants this year than we have in the past. So we're trying to utilize every opportunity we have to obtain funding to help offset costs. So that's why we're seeing an increase there, and we're at 65% for collections. The federal general purpose, that's where you see our larger grants. So that's where our Title I is, Title II, those type of programs. The collection for that sort of ebbs and flows throughout the year based upon when we're actually utilizing it and when we're requesting reimbursement from the federal government. So the last 2 months have been low collection months, meaning there was not a lot to claim. But as we go into spring, we're gonna see our claims increase there, so you're gonna see the percent start to increase as far as our federal collections go. Okay, so.
Does that 386 deficit, does that take into consideration our redirection?
Technically, yes, a piece of it at least. So that redirection, we didn't receive that full 500,000 all at once.
Okay.
They're gonna spread it out through the remainder of the year. So it does take into account a fraction of it, but not all of it. So basically, all that's telling us right now is simply that we've spent more than we have as far as actual revenues go. But what you'll actually see right there, when we budget, we do a balanced budget, so we offset everything. That 386 is the transfers for the non-voted debt into our debt service. So that's, we expect to see a deficit technically of about 499,000, but we won't actually end up seeing that deficit because we received $500,000 more in revenue than what we had originally anticipated because of that redirection of apportionment. So as the year goes on, as long as our spending stays the same and trends the same, you're gonna see that number go down.
Okay.
Because of the increase in the revenues. Okay, so next page where we get into more detail. So yes, there's a bunch of red. One of the areas that I've been tracking, just because this is a first year for us as far as the increased salaries for certificated, that 557,000 over what was budgeted, that's the number that I'm tracking extremely closely to see where we're going to end up being at the end of the year. Now that variance is basically the system telling us that if everything were to trend exactly the same, that at the end of the year, we should be $557,000 over what I had budgeted. We had budgeted for an 18% increase for certificated. We obviously gave more than an 18% increase for certificated. That's where that variance is coming in. So on that other report where I showed you we are $1.2 million over where we were last year, that's where you're not seeing those two numbers match. Because we budgeted at 18, we gave more than that, and so that variance is based off of budget and not off of actual. Okay, but the overall ending, if you look at the ending fund balance for the annual forecast, so that's gonna be the bold number, yep, right there. Our ending fund balance is still looking healthy. So even though we're seeing a lot of red, it's because there was so much up in the air during the last legislative session and with negotiations ongoing that we weren't certain where we were going to end up falling. And so we budgeted at one amount and we're expending more. But when it comes down to it, our fund balance is still healthy. So, that's all I have on that. Do you guys have any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome.
All right, the budget guidelines.
Yeah, so the budget guidelines are next. You're gonna pull those up, please. Ashley and I will probably tag team a little bit on this one, but this is a document that you are used to seeing from us. We haven't changed the format in the last 6 or 7 years probably as a district. And we start with the requirements that we have set as part of ER4, our budget planning document. Those are what we start with when we build this set of guidelines. And then we look at the needs that we're going to have as a district to meet the student learning needs and any other facilities, et cetera, issues that are going to come up for the year. And we develop a plan that fits within the board guidelines, which also includes that we need to have an ending fund balance and undesignated general fund balance of no less than 8% of total expenditures. Now, there is, interestingly, some legislation that's floating out there right now that would actually require districts to have, I think, 8.8%. And so if that passes, we will have to come back to the board and make an adjustment there. The motivation for that is, it's 8-point-something%. I think it's 8, but whatever that fraction is, it will be a little bit greater than we have. The motivation for that is that that would be the equivalent to a 1 month's apportionment and costs within the district. And that's why we moved it as a board to move ours to 8.0% about a year and a half ago, was because we, at that point in time, it became very clear that in order to meet payroll for a month, if something should happen and we wouldn't get our apportionment, that's the amount of dollars that we would need, so.
What, have you seen the language on that proposed legislation? What are they going to do if you don't?
There isn't a penalty, there's just it's another kind of like one of those unfunded mandate kinds of things. It's going to say you must, but there's not a penalty if you don't. So I'm not sure yet how that is moving through and whether they're going to, whether the outcome would be to task OSPI with monitoring everybody. There was language about we'd have to do a report and OSPI would keep a spreadsheet of who's doing it and who isn't, so.
Well,
I don't know.
if they did mandate it, it would be subject to audit through SAO. And that would be a black and white audit. You either met it and there's no recommendation, or you didn't meet it and you get a finding. So,
So there you go.
yeah, there's that side.
So, but part of that 8.8% is local money, right? So how can they determine what we do with our own local money? Never mind.
So if we keep moving Denise up to the next page. So then we, in the document, we made some predictions for enrollment. We tend to be conservative, but we predict that our enrollment will, FTE next year will be 2283 plus or minus 10. That would follow the trend that we have for consistent but not dramatic growth over the last eight or so years. So we're pretty confident about that. And then we talk about things that we do know, that we will have some increases in some of the apportionment items. We talk about our estimated collection of the M&O levy if the language stays the same, right? And again, there is a bill that's seen a lot of action that would change the local levy amount from what was passed last year in the fix to maximum percentage of your budget to 20%. Right now, the average on the state since the McClary fix is about a 10% levy amount, so it would change that average to the maximum would be 20% or $3,500 per student. And this, currently, it is $1,500 per student in the legislation. So that would authorize districts to go out for a different levy collection. And so that would, as we move into next year and start looking at what we're gonna do for levy collections, that could have an impact both on what we take to the public as well as how we do our budget. So we will be watching that bill very closely, and I have the number written down in my office. I can share with you, but we will be watching that very closely because it has some pretty important impact on our budget and our programs in the district. So things, again, as usual, are still up in the air a little bit. So this is a draft budget guideline, and what the legislators do may have some impact. And so then section 4.0 just talks about how we will spend our general fund, and keep moving, Denise. Thank you. And then what our expectations are for our fund balance, our vehicle fund, ASB, capital projects, just a quick description. And there's also where we expect to be with our existing debt and non-voted debt. And I want to call out that we have done the numbers. This is the total amounts owed in both bond and unvoted debt are less than a third of the capacity that we have as a district to ask our voters to support. So as we continue to grow and have to start thinking about things like replacing Belfair and eventually adding a third elementary school, adding space at the middle school, some of the things that we will be looking at in the long term, we know that we have some debt capacity, so we'll have to be working with our community about what makes the most sense to help us move forward in those areas. But this year, we'll be doing some planning in that as we move into next year, not making big changes until we do a lot more work with our community. We do have a materials adoption process happening right now for elementary school English language arts materials, and there will be a budgeted amount for that in the coming year for the new materials. The committee was actually meeting tonight earlier to try to narrow down the choices that they have so that we can bring in the vendors and share with the rest of the staff who would be involved so that we can give a recommendation to the board about what we move forward with. And then facilities, the big thing that's going to be happening in facilities in the immediate future is completing the things that we talked about with our community when we went out for. So finishing the stadium, and I do anticipate having the cost for the seating and timeline for that at the March meeting, so I'll be able to bring that information to you. And then with the dollars that are left, we are going to address replacing our softball facility with a facility that is equitable to our baseball field and appropriate for our female athletes, so that is not a Title IX issue. So that's the bulk of what's in there. We also know that we have in technology, there will be some changes to the cloud-based software that we use from WSIPSI, probably in the next year or two. We are hoping to push that off as long as possible, because although it's required across the state, the larger districts who have been piloting it have identified a lot of problems, and that it's not quite ready for prime time or for being used, particularly in some of the ways that we use our Skyward system. So we're going to push to be a late adopter rather than an early adopter, so that we don't have the problems that other districts are facing trying to use that in managing their classrooms. So it'll be more at the end of those 18 months than at the beginning that we do that. And so I think that, and then of course, and 14.0, when we continue the discussion about the disposition or potential disposition of the Beller wetlands, that would fit under that descriptor. And we do not anticipate any significant reductions next year, enhancements to the basic ed program. We will be expanding again with the growth in students, but we are also looking at the development of a early kindergarten program that kind of bridges preschool and then to the kindergarten needs and meeting some of the needs of the kids that we have in our community. We have a fairly high percentage of students who have not had any kind of preschool experience when they enter kindergarten, and the impact on the learning environment is pretty significant. So we are in the process of developing a solution to that we'll be talking to the board about later in the year too. And that will use categorical funds and apportionment dollars that will be new apportionment dollars based on the students who participate in that. So that will have an impact overall on our budget planning for next year. So that's the outline of what we've got going on there.
Let's see. Try to scroll back down.
I think next is the district.
Success plan?
Yeah.
You have a
District
okay.
success.
Yeah, we do have a district success plan, which we presented in the fall, and when we presented it, it was very clear, and we talked to the board and quite a bit about the fact that we had identified a need to address the whole child in order to make the kind of gains in learning outcomes for our students that we want to see. So almost over a year ago, we started really looking at what that would mean and defining that. And as you know, we added Beth Work in her position this year to help lead the district in getting this work done. So other than to say that we're moving forward towards the goals set out in this multi-year plan, I'm going to have Beth actually give a short presentation about where we are and where we think we're going at this point in time to talk about our implementation.
Hi. I think we do have a PowerPoint, and we actually didn't redesign this just for tonight, but I added some slides in here. We had the privilege of being accepted to present at the WERA conference, which is a Washington Educational Research Association, back in December. So we put a proposal into a few different conferences, and they wanted to hear what we had going on here. So we started with this to represent what we're doing and our journey that we're along. And we had a lot of great ideas come out of that from people that were in the crowd. Some people from OSPI who are launching a big multi-tiered systems of supports network from the state level, were interested in where we're at and how they can support us, and actually asked us to join some of their grant opportunities, which has led to a lot of opportunities to really support the work in the schools that we're doing. So I thought I'd leave a few slides in so you could see what we presented at that conference, but also give updates on how our schools are doing. This is one piece of work that we wanted to have a visual representation of all the work we're doing. It's a 5-year plan. So as we start pushing out into our whole community, getting all the work we're doing and support and bringing it to families and community, we wanted something to tie it to. So as we start doing some communication and social media and helping do some learning with the community, we want them to see this. So I think this is the first opportunity. Actually, I take that back. The high school ASB was the first group to see our new logo. So you guys are the second ones. But you'll start seeing that more as we develop more publications to go out. So this is just a visual for you and to remind me to tell you that our 5-year plan for multi-tiered systems of support, what you see in the blue there is actually implementation science. You always start with exploring, making sure that the initiative is something that's going to work for you, and then you work into building and beginning the installation, which is really just planning. So last year we did a lot of exploring. We're still doing some exploring this year, but most of what we're doing this year, this document had 3 pages. One was for a district level team that was following this process, one for school level teams, and then a third plan for advanced tiers, which is tier 2 and tier 3. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each set of teams and where we're at in year 2, essentially, building a plan, building a 3-tiered system. So at our district team, we meet monthly for about an hour, but then we do a lot of our work via the web. We have representatives, not just administrators. It was really important to us to have teachers, counselor, and even our classified staff representing so that we can start getting some of their input into the system we're building for our students. I left these pictures in just to be more than just data that we show. So that's our assistant principal at Hawkins. Okay, so our district team, what are some things that we're doing? We are using a guide. We have a self-assessment tool. This self-assessment tool is to help us build capacity. Because if we don't make changes at the district level, we won't be able to sufficiently support our school teams to do the work that they need to do for the students. So this self-assessment looks at these different bullet points. When we took this assessment in the fall, we had 36% in place to support multi-tiered systems of support. So we are working off of this rubric to tell us what do we need to do next. So every month we look back and we just accomplish another task. So when we just looked through it, just this past week I went through and highlighted some of the work we've done and things that we have made changes to. We're now at 53%. So our goal is we want to be able to build capacity to make sure that our system for the students is sustainable, not just something we do for a couple of years and then move on. So what are some of those things that we're doing? We're getting a lot of input from stakeholders. Part of the input we're asking for is, because we're focusing first on behavior and social emotional learning for our students, we want to know from families and from staff and from the kids, what's important to you about how students behave? What's important to you about their social emotional learning? So we've done surveys. ASB has gone to football games. We've at EL family nights, been surveying staff at back to school nights. So we're just collecting a lot of input from all of them. And our next meeting in March, we're going to get back together and say, okay, what are the core top 3 or 4 things that our stakeholders are most important so we can focus all our work there. So other things we're doing is trying to align what's our mission, what's our vision. You'll get to see more updates on this as we finish it. We're working on a definition of what is tier 1, what is tier 2, what is tier 3 for our district. There's lots of research out there that tells you, but we want to make sure it fits the needs of our students. So I'll show you a little example in a second. We have some work groups from our district team looking at our assessments, because part of MTSS is about having the right data, the right tools. You don't need every tool and every piece of data. It's having the right things on your plate and knowing how to look at them. So we're really looking at all the testing that we're doing and what's the most important, and are there things that we can take off the plates of our staff and out of the hands of our students. So that's a big work group that's taking time this year. Another big piece to make this system work is that we have leadership teams that know how to run the system. So a lot of our work is supporting our leadership teams at the schools to know how to function in this system. So that's a lot of work that we're doing. But the coaching and training, we're doing a ton of PD together as a district team, also providing some. So not only do our school teams, but I've helped do a couple trainings for substitute teachers. And anytime we're doing a training, we're also including in, what is PBIS? What is MTSS? What is the whole child? What does that mean? So every training that we're doing for paraeducators, we're giving them pieces of information that they can then take back into the schools. I wanted to highlight some of the transportation trainings that we've done, because I just wanted to give a shout out. Our drivers are all over this. They can't get enough. They're throwing ideas at me all the time, and they're really supportive of what can we do to help keep our students safe on the bus and promote positive relationships. So I'm really excited about the work that the transportation department is just running with it. I can't keep up with them almost. The last thing I want to say on there is this district team, a huge purpose is to help get communication out. That's why we wanted representation on there from teachers and classified. So our goal was to have 3 newsletters this year that kind of highlight some of the work. So we've done one. I'm not sure if we got a link to that, but we can share it. We're getting ready to send out a second one soon. But we felt like there was still a lot of questions like, I'm really not sure what's going on. So we had a great idea from a team member saying, what if we had them ask us questions every month, and then we just publicly just post them all over. So we're doing like a little Q&A every month just to try and help everyone stay connected. So that is, I think, oh, I wanted to show you just one visual that the district team is putting together is how do we define the tiers? And this is someone on the team's idea of how we would visually represent it. We want to make sure everyone knows that all of our students are involved in tier 1, which is everything that we do for academics, behavior, and social emotional learning. But we know that we need to plan for 15% to get a little more instruction. And even 5% of those kids are going to need really intense support. So this is our visual to help us in North Mason start planning for each layer that we provide for students. And stop me if you have questions anytime. So a little bit about our school teams. That's the Belfair leadership team back in August. Every team, it makes up a little bit different of the school, but they have their own process of how they choose that team. But here, I meet with each school team for an hour every month, but then 3 times a year, they've committed to a 2-hour evening meeting where we get a lot of work done. So there's 3 big goals in our plan this year. One is learning about multi-tiered systems of support and learning about the whole child approach. So they're reading articles, they're doing research about social emotional learning, PBIS for the whole school and in classrooms, restorative practices, but then also about data and how do you problem solve and use the problem solving model. So that's some PD they're doing. But they have a rubric as well that guides them in learning what do we need to plan for tier 1. So that's, bullet point number 2. They are drafting a tier 1 plan. And what they're looking for are commitments from the whole school. We have a lot of things happening in all of our classrooms, but we want each school to choose a couple of things that happen throughout our school. So commitments in all classrooms, commitments throughout the building. And they're going to take that back to their staff and make sure that everyone's on board with that plan as well. Especially at the high school, we have a lot of student leadership leading this work. I think there's 5 different work groups that the ASB has put together to help put their tier 1 plan in place. So it's kind of neat to see that, and the staff leadership team is saying, this is great, okay, just let us know, what do you think? So they're working together to put that plan together. But the teachers are looking at behavior and social emotional learning like they do academics. How do we teach that? We need lesson plans. We need some active learning. So they're designing activities. They're trying out some now, but really the goal is for next year. How do we really help kids learn how to follow our school rules and how to be productive citizens in our community? So it's neat to watch the teacher creativity come out in the planning that they're doing. Most importantly, that 4th bullet point under number 2, we want to make sure that teaching behavior and social emotional learning isn't just another thing we do. How can we integrate it into academics already? So if you're teaching a reading lesson, but maybe the target is also to work well in a small group and to communicate with your team members. So how can we make sure we're intentionally teaching behavior and SEL during our academic lessons, so it's not just another thing to add into our schedule. So again, our 3rd thing that each team is doing is how do we really monitor closely our school success plan? We have goals. How do we come back to that every month or every couple months and see if we're on track? So I want to show you just a little example. Oh, actually, this first is the rubric that each school team is using to say, do we have everything in place we need for tier 1? So blue is where they were when we started in September, October. And after all the work they've done every month, all schools have made growth to having the components they need in place for tier 1. So I thought that was great progress. But again, this is one example. Let me tell you about this school. They were learning how to look at their office referral data. So we collect all this data, but we never really had a team that really knew how to say, well, what do we do now? We collect the data. Should we make changes? Is everything going okay? So in October, when we looked at it, they started noticing as we were digging in deeper, a lot of the office discipline referrals were coming out of kindergarten. And so when they looked at, okay, well, is that normal? Is it getting better? So they broke it down by the week from the first 8 weeks of school. And what they saw was the trend is saying if we don't do something now, the trend shows every week it's getting more and more significant. So I left them to problem solve and say, okay, come up with a plan. Tier 1, what are we gonna do for all kindergartners? Because it wasn't just a couple of kiddos. So I didn't know what they did, but when I came back a couple months, I had a lot of questions because this is what I saw. I calculated the weekly averages after we had met that time, and I said, you guys have done something different. So everyone was really excited to hear from that kindergarten team, and the leadership team started sharing, you know, they re-looked at how they were doing the play-based learning. They redid some of the schedules in the day. They redid some of the grouping. They just looked at the routine procedures of kindergarten, made some changes, especially right after Christmas. Specialist teachers start speaking up. Well, we did this. We made changes to how kids were coming into PE and how they were going to music. So I commended this team for this is, now we have a visual. We weren't sure if things were getting better. We thought maybe they were, but now we had data to support all those efforts they were doing. Were working for those kindergartners. So that was a great example of how to use data to make improvements for all. Okay. The last set of teams that we have forming in each school is a team for Tier 2 and Tier 3. And remember, that's for about 15 to 20% of our school. We want to have interventions in place and ready to go for them. So it's a little different at each school who makes up the team. And we're still forming, but for the most part, right now, it's a lot of the administrators and specialist staff. So things that they are doing is organizing all the Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions, doing research. What interventions do we need at our school? Not just what does the research say is great, but what do our kids need? So they're designing them, they are trying out implementing some of them, monitoring progress, getting families involved and looking at the progress and supporting the interventions, and then sharing success and going back to their building leadership team and showing some of the progress. So I want to leave you with a little bit of a visual of what these interventions look like. By the end of the year, each school, part of their 3-tiered plan, will be available for everyone, or what are the Tier 2 interventions we have. For each intervention, the team is describing exactly what it's for, who is, and then in the third column in the middle, how do we know when a student needs that intervention? So that we can really make sure, based on data, we know when a student needs a Tier 2 support or a Tier 3 support. And that way a team can quickly say every week or every month, oh, based on our data, this student needs an intervention. We no longer are gonna have to wait for teachers or parents to say, I'm trying everything I can and they're not making progress. A lot of times what's happening is we're going to the teachers and saying, we just noticed this student needs an intervention, and they're always like, yeah, we could use any help we can get. So we're designing not only academic or behavior and social emotional interventions, but this grid will include our academic interventions as we go along as well. And same thing for Tier 3. So it's blank right now. I think they've worked on it since then, but they're filling out how do we know when students need to be placed in an intervention, how will we monitor progress, and how do we know when they're ready to not need that level of support? Because our goal is to intervene, get them the help they need, and then they don't need it any longer. And here's just an example because it's a model of how we want our teachers and family members to start seeing, are my students making progress? So we want to be able to visually represent it, not just say, yeah, they're making progress, they don't need that support anymore. We're doing some quick progress monitoring. So this shows that a student, oh, it's not going to work. I'll leave it right there. So it was showing that a student in the first part was not meeting their goal, which was the green line. So we drew a line and put a layer of support in place for that kiddo. And after we put that support in place, you see 3 dotted lines or 3 dots that show they're not making progress. They're still not above the green line. So we drew a line and added another layer of support on for this kiddo, and now finally for 3 weeks in a row, they were meeting their goal and right up where they were supposed to be. So then that team is gonna monitor these graphs and know when students are ready to start not needing all the layers of support that we are putting in place for them. So that's just one example. I think I lost my PowerPoint. control there, but that was the last one. Any questions about progress we're making?
I just want to say, I think this, as I've described to members in the community, what is different about our schools today, this is really something that I think is different. It just wasn't in the schools any time that I was going through any of the grades. And so something has happened in the last 50 years. I just threw that in for a joke. But something has happened that I really think is important for a goal of an informed electorate. And that is giving people the skills and giving people the confidence that they can learn the skills to progress. And I thought that one early graph that you had with a long green cube, and then the smaller one above that, and the smaller one above that, is a real mark of what a school that provides everyone a chance to succeed ought to look at. So I'm just very encouraged by this whole endeavor.
Thank you. It's definitely helping us target where to put our resources. When you have data-based decisions, you know we need to put our counselors and our mental health supports. We have a lot of great resources. We just need to know how to get them to the kiddos who need them most. So that's the goal.
I think it's great having the teams that you have up there and, you know, transportation and substitutes and stuff. But I saw one aspect of the district that wasn't represented.
What's that?
It's the board.
We need your input.
Well, I think if we want buy-off from top to bottom, I just wouldn't be afraid to invite us if you guys are having deals.
Perfect. Okay,
So-
we're coming back to it. We got snowed out last week
Yeah,
too, so.
it happens.
I'm just thinking about the number of traumas you're avoiding. I had a traumatic experience in some technical subjects going along, and I think it's affected my personality. But I think that you're helping a lot of people now to normalize their understanding of learning and to normalize even confronting something that they can't do now and to get the help they need so that they'll be able to cope with it or do it sometime in the future. So I really think this has been a missing piece in the education experience that I've had that's unprecedented. I do not have anything like it in my experience as I look back in the memory banks. And it would be interesting to see how even if youngsters that are on this board, like somebody to my left, how much help that was available to them. Because I think this is relatively new, and I think it's a very progressive sign.
It is. I'm really encouraged by the teachers too. They've just embraced this and want to learn as much as they can and help their colleagues as well too.
Great,
Thank you.
thanks,
You
Ida.
bet.
So we don't have a lot on capital projects tonight. Like I said a little bit earlier, we will anticipate having some decisions to make so that we can complete the stadium and move forward with our last playground type expenses at the March board meeting. So I look forward to talking to you about that then. The next item is the Sweetwater Creek Amendment, and I basically included that in the agenda for you as an informational item. You know, this has been a long time project. It took a while to get this transfer completed, but what you have as a document there is a copy of the letter from RCO, that the Recreation Office, that confirms that the transfer has been completed and that the Sweetwater Creek parcel is now, belongs to the Port of Allen rather than school district. And then the Port of Allen intends, as you know, to develop a park at that location adjacent to Belfair Elementary, and to restore, among the projects will be the restoration of the water wheel and a fishing area and just making a really nice community park there. So that's where we are with that. The next item is the application to waive the 180 school day requirement for snow days. And I just wanted to bring to your attention, As you know, we had 5 days of school that we could not attend last week because transportation was not possible to get all of our kids to school. For the week, last week, beginning the previous weekend and ending at midnight on Friday, the 15th, the governor had declared a state of emergency, which then makes it possible for school districts to apply to waive the 180-day school attendance requirement as long as you meet the minimum at least 1,027 hours of student instructional time in the district. Our instructional time, depending on the grade level of school, averages about 50 hours over that minimum. So we do have the space to look at waiver of some of the time for students. All the other additional requirements in applying for a waiver include that you've tried as reasonably as possible to make up the days that you are missing, and that is part of our plan. We had the first snow makeup day that we had scheduled was actually Tuesday of this week, and we did have school on that day, so we've made up one of the 5 days. And we do plan to use our other planned snow makeup day on June 19th to make up a second day. We also discussed with our NMEA leadership the potential for looking at the non-school day that's in our calendar right now in March, the term turnaround day, and making that a school day so that we could pick up and make up a third day. We, as a result of that discussion, they're going to talk to their leadership and membership and come back with what the outcome of that is for us. And we sent a survey question and then followed up by a more formal survey to staff today. Is that even possible? You know, would we have enough staff available who aren't already gone because that wasn't a planned work day? So we're gathering all that information, and it will help us make that decision. We hope that that is a possible day to look at. That would give us 2 days to apply for a waiver for. And what that means, when we apply for a waiver, it waives the student time, but it doesn't waive our contractual obligations with our various bargaining groups. So for example, for the teachers still would need to work the 180 days that are required in their contract. So as we discussed when we met with NMEA earlier this week, we would come to some agreements about what work we would do on those days that would improve the learning experience for kids in the future in North Mason School District. And there's some very specific language about what you have to define how you're doing in the application process. So we will do all of that. And the application process includes some community involvement, and we have a committee meeting next week that we're going to ask that committee to also give us some input on. And then it would include a need for the board to take a resolution. So we will bring all of the information that we gather back to the board at the March meeting. And if it looks like a go, we'll ask for a resolution for asking the state to waive 2 of the 5 days. And that would have us have kids, that would have us have kids ending on the 19th and staff ending on the 21st of June. So that's our plan, and we'll bring you more information next month. The way the process works too is you have until the 5th of a month to apply and get your whole packet turned in, and then OSPI has until the 10th of the following month to give you an answer. And so if we take a resolution at the March board meeting, then we would turn our packet in the next couple days after that board meeting, so that technically it would have been submitted by April 5th. So OSPI would have until May 10th to give us a solution. So we will plan as if either way, and then we will be able to let families know as soon as we get a resolution from the state, whether the kids are gonna go to school those last few days or not.
Thank you for clearing that up. I was even wondering, I had many questions coming and I don't even know. So, good clarification there.
All right. Community linkage planning of the month. Everyone sees the calendar of stuff. Art, you have March's board letter.
Right, and I can't remember, I didn't bring my notes about what we had talked about last month. Can you,
I'm gonna have to look at my notes too, so we'll get together.
right,
Okay.
All right. WASDA support of federal funding for the We the People program. WASDA supports restoration of the full federal funding for We the People programs nationwide, but this funding has not been available, and judges from all school districts currently fund themselves to participate in the competition judging event. Director Campbell would like to receive approval to send resolution to the WASDA legislative committee and ask the legislative proposal for 2020 this spring.
If I might say a word
Yeah.
in favor of this. Many of you know, or are familiar at least with the general outlines of the We the People program. When it was fully, it's run by, it's federally funded, and it has an office. And if I had thought to bring all my stuff, I could have brought you a whole bag of literature, a book, several supplementary pieces of information, and some things that are useful in education. So what it does, it would, if we had full funding for this, any of our teachers who were interested in participating would have a sort of a day camp affair in which they would go with other people who are doing this to get trained, see what other people are doing in this. And then they also would get paid for this. And then they would bring their skills to our kids. And so what it amounts to, for those of you who've seen some of our, what Kathy Kopp does and the other teachers, is that the kids have questions about various aspects of the Constitution relating to various periods of history. And maybe there's 3 people on a team, maybe there's 5. And they, each of them give presentations, and then after giving a very short presentation, they're asked questions by a panel of judges, sometimes including some of the folks up here. And then the teams are, you're the next team, and the teams are judged. When I get to see these teams going to Olympia, I think of people that have questions about public education. And I just wish more of you could go to Olympia to see what these teams are doing. And it's all made possible by the volunteer efforts of a skeleton crew of people that have paid their own way, put their own resources into making this possible. We ought to get help from the federal government. This is a crucial aspect of education, and if we got it, it wouldn't just be us. It would be, if the federal funding came through, it would benefit every district in the state, which would encourage more teachers to get themselves really on board in this, to know how to teach the material well, and to prepare our students to really know something in depth about some aspect of our Constitution. So I think it's a really good thing, and if you gave me the authorization to do this, I would bring it before WASDA and see if I couldn't get it on our top priorities for this coming year.
All right, so I would accept a motion to approve development of a resolution to be given to the WASDA Legislative Committee for restoration of full federal funding for We the People program.
I move that we approve what Craig just said.
That is an awful. Discussion.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, in a few words.
very briefly, I have a little book that kind of covers it.
When we started out years ago, as a representative of this, I had maybe 24 of these. And I would give them out sparingly, but I tried to give as many of these to kids that participated in the program here in, at North Mason. And basically what this is it's the Constitution plus a series of supporting documents. It's got the Declaration of Independence. It's got some crucial supporting documents such as Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman? It has also got things from James Madison and others, Learned Hand, What is Liberal Society? It's just a nice resource that you can carry in your vest pocket, and you can, when you're carrying this, you're carrying heat. And it just seems to me that this would be a good thing for our kids to have, and this program would give them a reason to use it.
With that said, I will call for a question. All those in favor of approving the resolution, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Moving on, assurance of organizational performance and policy review. These will be the monitoring reports and E2 student success. And before we get into this too much, I understand you'll have more stuff, information next month.
Right, yeah.
But I'm wondering if this isn't something that should be moved till like after a school year?
I want to talk about that, yeah, because E2, to talk about, before when it was E2 and it was just academic, we were always talking at this time of year about the previous year's data. And as we combined E2 and E3 to make a more whole child approach, we're still gonna have that same problem. So what we did do in this monitoring report, and is different than what we have done usually, is we sat down with the administrators after the board adopted this new E2 and really came up with what we felt was an initial comprehensive list, although I'm sure it will change with time, of data points that we can use to demonstrate our effectiveness in this area. And so this version of this report just gives you those data points to look at and hopefully to get some input from the board on are there any that don't make sense, or are there too many in a group, or different thoughts you might have about those. But really with the idea that either we bring it back next month, but we would still be looking at old stuff, or we just report on some stuff now, and then a year from now, we would have a more complete report, because some of these are new items that we're just starting to collect. Or do we wait till, make this an end of the year, beginning of summer report, so it's more comprehensive of what we did in the current year? So all of those were questions I had for you guys to discuss.
I think my preference would be doing it after the school year, instead of getting it piecemeal, getting maybe a full comprehensive. And doing it right after the school year, I think, does that allow time for changes to be made or correction, or?
Should we move for
Collection
the
of
action
enough data.
to talk about this?
Oh,
and
that's a
then-
good point. Yeah, we should. So we need to take an action on E2.
I move
Um,
that,
Actually, before you do that, I don't know, we could just table that. Could we could have a discussion and just table that as not
We
have
can
a
have
vote?
discussion without having a motion.
Yeah,
We can talk, there's no restriction on that.
so,
Normally, what we do with these reports is you accept them, but what I'm really asking you to do
Mhm.
is
do you
put
want the
it to a
comments
different time.
of the monitoring?
No, not really, because at this point in time, this isn't a complete monitoring
Right,
report,
which is,
because it doesn't
which
have the
I
data.
would have to vote no on that part,
Yeah.
so
So
without.
I would like you to say, I'm sorry, either bring it back in March with whatever you have, or bring it back at the end of the year, and I think probably to get a comprehensive report, July is better than June, because some of the state
Right.
data we don't get as quickly as we would like.
Also, in looking at the points you have here, there's some of them, I don't know what they are.
Right,
And I need to get some education myself to understand what we're talking about more. And at the very least, we should move it, a month down the road just for this time, but I like the idea of the end of the year or July. Isn't July the month when we really don't have any others to look at? Then that would be a perfect time to
Yeah.
put that in.
Yeah, I still hold my reservations on this policy being so in depth of putting you guys into this box that is hard to, I mean, I just see all these, and these are great data points, but it leaves so much
Well, and I think when we
to fall through.
created this list, we did, with the administrators, we were trying to create a list of all the potential data points we know about at this point in time, but not necessarily that we would report on every single one of them every time, but that we would look for the pieces that best represent that we had accomplished the bullet points in each of the sections.
Mhm.
So, and those could change over time, and they could even be things that aren't currently on this list, as the way that we measure our successes hopefully changes and adjusts. So, but one of the concerns we had, as the board had when we made this adoption, is, do you even have any data to talk about some of these things? So the first step we felt was to come back to you with, okay, here's some of the data we think that we have that we can talk about these things. And some of them, like Art said, you don't know what they are, so we would need to explain those, and we may decide those are good answers or not for the board. But, it's a,
I would want to see
In
the stuff that's
progress.
going to be sustainable, that are gonna be, because if, just to pull one out, worksite learning participation data, which is on your, 2B, personal skills development. If it's determined 3 years from now that that's not immeasurable, well then what was the point of doing it for the first 2 years? It doesn't tell us as a board anything, if we're not following that. So anything that you guys choose to decide what measures success, it's gotta be a long-term commitment to measure that.
right,
So that's, and there's a lot of stuff there,
there is a lot of stuff there.
so.
So what she's asking and what we're potentially going to do is to ask to move this to July every year from now on, so that we don't visit it in the middle of the year.
Oh, we don't
or
have to ask,
again.
we can just do that.
You can
That's
just
what I'm
do-
saying, well, she's asking
Yeah.
that we do that, and that's what we're doing next.
Yeah, I think moving this one to like July
I think that's totally
and
right on.
so, with regards to that, I would. How do I do this one? I think it's appropriate to make a motion to table E2 until July, our July meeting.
So moved.
Oh, what did I do that? Discussion on that.
Now, is that just this one? If we're tabling it just till that, does that move all of the other, do we?
No.
No, I think just E2.
We do the other things on the calendar the way you've already set them up, we just move you to. So like
Right, so,
whatever's
but I
on,
mean, no, next year, are we gonna have to table this again, or are we
No, we'll just move it
moving
to the
this up
July.
from now on?
Mhm.
Okay.
In July. And that was, I mean,
I
that was
just,
a,
the wording of tabling makes me think
Right.
just this
Oh,
time,
I see what you're
but
saying.
I wanted to make sure that we
Yeah.
have it all taken care of next time, we don't have to deal with it again.
right,
You know, also technically, when you table something, you don't actually normally pick a date of when you're gonna look at it again. Tabling is a
how about rescheduling?
perfect.
Okay, so
More correct.
reschedule E2 to be measured in July every year.
Yes.
Cause that was a big policy change,
it was big.
so. All those in favor, say by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, E2 will be in July. All right, ER9, executive requirement 9, communication with the public. And I accept a motion from the board of accepting, but yeah, the board find the superintendent's performance to comply with ER9.
So moved.
Okay, discussion. I do have a question. The strategic plan, how old is that now?
Well, we make a new, there's two answers to that question. So the strategic plan that you developed with broad community
Mhm.
support is old.
Okay.
And it needs to be redone in that way. What we have done is updated and rewritten and revised and totally redesigned our school improvement plan, our district improvement plan, based on the input, based on the input we received at board meetings about
Okay.
over concerns that we had about student bullying, student behaviors, with student interactions. So all of that has had a huge impact on the work that we're doing now.
Mhm.
But that more traditional approach to strategic planning involving everybody, we do need to, I believe, revisit as a board, maybe coming back and doing a new process. I think we have discussion later, or I want to bring up later in this process, a response to your question earlier in the year about doing some retraining with the board with Rick Maloney, and we have some dates to discuss. And I think after we do that training, would be a really good time then to talk about scheduling a new
Okay.
process.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Any other comments?
No.
Okay. Call for the question. All those in favor of finding the superintendent performance to comply with ER9, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
I now have a comment.
Oh.
And the comment is, I really like the way you use your words to say the right things and not get, like I do and some of the rest of us get caught up in saying, in compliance,
Oh,
because it lends itself to thinking the wrong thing.
I am operating in a
You're
very
doing a
basic
great
level.
job on that. Thank you.
Okay.
Here, here.
You didn't make me blush. Executive requirement 12, student conduct and discipline. And another motion, action is required on this. If we want, find the board, find the superintendent performance to comply with ER 12.
Mr. Chair, I move that we find the superintendent in compliance with ER 12.
All right, discussion. I do have a question. Sorry.
That's
I'm
okay,
that
I have
person
something I
there.
want to point out too, so first.
The graphs, the data that you provided in here with regards to suspension counts, is that, are the previous year's data based off the same time frame?
Yes,
That's good, that's really good, those are good numbers.
yeah, they are. What I do when I talk about those, it was frustrating because I don't like to keep changing the data points that we're using, and we've been using a state report for a couple of years that's different than our pieces here that come out of our homeroom data. And we had been assured that those data points would be available to us because those are going to be part of the new state report card. And I think they will be eventually available again, but since the state started to release the new state report card this winter, the discipline part of it hasn't been updated to include that data. So the state data that I had was the same from a year ago, and so I had to look for a different report, so I reverted to these that we had used previously.
Okay.
So just to be clear.
But it's still showing the positive.
It's showing some
movement.
improvement,
Okay.
yes.
So that's what matters. Okay. Questions or discussion? All those in favor of finding the superintendent's performance to comply with ER 12, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? You all say aye, you don't need to say that. Okay, so adjournment, and we have the good order board comments. Art, I'm gonna start with you, if you have anything to
No, I don't.
add. Okay. Leanna?
Well, I was just noticing all these thank you cards, and then one over there says, "Dear Mr. Campbell," and I haven't gone and read them all, but where are they from?
Actually, we'd had these for a while, but we
Oh.
wanted to remind you that, the past month has been Board Appreciation Month and that you are appreciated. So,
I think last year we ended up with some at Take Home ones,
Mhm.
and I've read every single one. They're so cute when they're a little bit misspelled, they're uppercase and a lowercase. I love that. So they're very much appreciated. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. John?
I can't believe that I didn't know I was being appreciated.
I know, the
This
second
will
one
give-
right there has your
This
name
will,
on it.
this will give me an opportunity to look at something else. I usually don't like to miss such a thing.
Spencer, you got anything?
Nope.
I would like to make one comment regarding some earlier discussion that you had, and hopefully maybe someone who's watching who has some power to do something. That legislation going through that would allow us to levy more money is if that's not evidence that the legislature didn't fix McCleary, I don't know what is. So if that passes through the legislature, to me, that signifies they know that they failed. So,
Have you called your representative?
it's on my list of things to do. So,
I have one thing.
yeah, right.
It sits here somewhere at the adjournment phase, but we had discussed, doing some updating our training on, policy governance as a board, and, Denise did some research, and you asked that we invite Rick Maloney from WASDA to do the training, and so, we have March 23rd, 9th, or 16th, or any Saturday in April.
I'm not available on any Saturday in April.
Okay.
But March 23rd, you said?
March 23rd works for me.
That's the best day for Craig.
Wide open for me.
Yeah, if it's not, I'll
Actually,
make it
I would be available the Saturday right before Easter. That's the only one though.
What about March 23rd? Are you available then?
What is a day of the week then? Is it-
Saturday.
Saturday.
Well, March 23rd. No,
Okay.
Did you say you're open or you're not open?
not open.
Not
At this point, in 2 weeks, I have every weekend except the Easter weekend. I'm tied up. So,
Okay. So I will, we'll find out what Laura has to say. We'll get to Craig and,
Maybe send out an email, just give me the dates of which ones and find out if there's anyone where all five
that
of us
works
can
for
do it.
everybody.
Yeah.
Okay,
And if
we'll
we
do
have to
that.
push it out.
Then we'll do it.
All right. Director Campbell will do this board self-assessment of the meeting.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone, and it was mentioned here, that we are governed by policy governance, which means we have the freedom to discipline ourselves. And we have exercised that by having criteria by which we judge the conduct of our own meetings. And that is the general heading for what I'm about to go through now. So we have rate the board's meeting behavior as satisfactory or not satisfactory. And this concerns the agenda. This concerns whether or not we were prepared to discuss it, whether or not the participation was balanced. Nobody dominated, I would say. And our work was conducted in an atmosphere of trust and openness. And the meeting participants treated each other with respect and courtesy. Civility is good to preserve wherever it can be, and I think we are models of that. So, governance principles review, and I won't mention all of them, but board actions occur at the policy level rather than at the operational level. And I think you've seen that this evening, because we have spoken of a series of policies, and we're not speaking about how we're gonna fix the schools or how we're gonna run it better than Dana is. We're concerned with the policies, that's governance, and that's where we put our efforts. We minimize time spent monitoring past performance. I think that's built in to our success plans. The board follows an annual calendar. We certainly do that. We spend most of our time deliberating issues, defining and clarifying its vision, and linking with its community as opposed to fixing things. I'm proud to say I don't think we've fixed anything. But we do set down policies by which things can be fixed by those that are in a position to do so. The board supports the superintendent in any reasonable interpretations of its policies. I would say in all of the above, we're satisfactory.
Okay. Next meeting will be held right here, March 21st, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. And with that, all done.
Thank you.